Hey guys, welcome to the YouTube channel. In this video, we are going to be creating a to-do list app using Redux. And the prerequisites of this are that you should have some basic knowledge of what React is, what components are, and essentially what the role of Redux is. I'll briefly explain what the role of Redux is, but basically, Redux helps us to communicate a certain set of values inside the store to all the components simultaneously. So there is basically a global store that maintains all values. In our case, for the to-do list app, it's going to be the list of all the to-do items that we have to store. So anyways, I have opened the documentation for Redux so that we can go down and we can see what are the commands available. So now in the documentation, there's a section called Create a React Redux app. This is the recommended way to start new apps with React and Redux. So we are simply going to copy this command, and essentially what it does, it installs all the required dependencies so that we can directly start working. So inside the desktop, I'm simply going to paste this command, and we are going to wait for this command to complete, and once it does, we will continue to the development part of this project. So our command has successfully run, and as you can see, the my app folder has been created on the desktop. So let's cd into my app and let's open it in Visual Studio Code. As you can see, when we have opened it in Visual Studio Code, there's already an app and there are some features. There's a counter app which is basically created, and if you open the terminal and type npm start, we will be able to see this. But for now, I don't want to do that because you can see this on your own. And also, we need to clean it up. I do not want most of these things out here. Testing is out of the scope of this video, so that's why we're going to delete it. So I'm going to perform a cleanup. But before performing the cleanup, I'll encourage you to install some of these extensions. A very important extension is ES7 React and Redux snippets. The link will be in the description below. So let's come back here and let's start the cleanup. So this app folder is not required. The features folder is not required. If we go into app.js, there'll be this stuff. We don't require these imports, and we can simply remove all this header. The next thing, app.test.js is out of the scope of this video. Report web vitals is out of the scope of this video. Setup tests is out of the scope of this video. And the logo, you can keep it, there's not a big deal. If you go to index.js, you can see all these things are imported here, such as store. So this is not the correct import for the store. So let's remove it. Apart from that, this report web vitals also should be removed. And we should simply remove this last few lines of code. And yeah, the cleanup is complete. So now that the cleanup is complete, I would like to emphasize on a picture that I found on the internet, which illustrates how Redux works. So as you can see, there is a UI component. It's currently having a 0, and the user would have clicked the event deposit. So we saw the deposit action has been sent from this event handler, and once that got sent, the reducer actually updated the state. So this is the explanation verbally, and now we can follow along with the flow. So as you can see, it's 0. The click event of deposit has been sent. The dispatcher basically sends a JSON object which is called as the action. This action is sent to the store and to the reducer. The reducer updates the state to 10. The 10 then re-renders the UI. So this is basically how Redux works, and this is how we are going to construct our application. So I'm going to keep referencing this image. So let's get back here. So as we saw, the first thing was the actions. So let us create an actions folder. And inside our action, we can notice that there are two types of actions. For our to-do application, there will be three types of actions which will be written in the types.js file. So inside this, I'm going to simply keep three lines. I'm going to use the right side alt key, and Again, now the three actions that are available are add to do, delete to do, and update to do. So why are we writing this in a separate file even though it's one small string? It's because this is the convention, and if you see bigger projects, they will also follow this convention. So the next step is to actually create our actions in an index file, right? So what is an action? As we saw, an action is basically a JavaScript object which has something called a type. The click event has been started, and then the action has a type of deposit with a payload of 10. So we have to define those functions. For now, we are simply going to define the add to do function. Later on, we'll create the functionality for update to do and delete to do. So we can just type export add to do. This is my function. It accepts one parameter, which is the task object. So our task object will have two parameters basically. One is an ID and one is the actual task item. So that's why I'm going to write it as task object. We are simply going to append it with a type of add to do, which we can see it's got auto suggested and automatically it got imported. And then after that, we are going to write task object. So we are going to export this as well. And out here, we forgot to write const, export const add to do. This is our add to do action. Now, once the action is complete, so once the add to do action is complete, we are going to create our, basically we saw the action. Now we need to create the store, which has the reducer that actually updates the state. So now we will go to our source file. Inside our source file, we will create a reducers folder. So let's create new folder. Let's call it reducers. And inside this reducers, the first thing we are going to do is create a todos.js, which is basically a to-dos reducer. Todos.js. So this is going to be a to-dos reducer. Now there can be multiple reducers as well. So that's why I'm just specifying the fact that this is a to-dos reducer. If you see bigger projects, they'll have multiple reducers. So let's go back to our to-dos reducer. Out here, we need to define something known as the initial state. So I'm going to simply write init state, and it's basically going to be a JavaScript object again. It will have something called a data, which is basically a null array as it's the initial state. So this is all I feel that is required. Our data array is basically an array of objects in which all the to-do items are going to be stored. Now we need to create a reducer. So what does a reducer do? It sees what is the type of action that it receives, and based on that type of action, it basically returns the state with the updated value. For example, it's add to do. So we'll just write it right now. Const add, not add to do, sorry. This is a reducer. So it's called to do's. Let's simply call it to do's. And it takes two parameters, the state, which is going to be the initial state, with an action. So keep in mind the action is accepted by the reducer. Now the next step is we simply write a switch statement, and inside the switch statement we are going to check for the action dot type, since we have passed the type in the add to do returned object. So in this, based on this, now if, or basically if the case is add to do, so let's just type case add to do. What are we supposed to do if it's an add to do? We are going to return the state as is. So we are going to return the state as is using the spread operator for obvious reasons. If you don't know what the spread operator is, please research about it. It's a very simple JavaScript function that is very widely used. So now the data needs to be updated. So data will basically have the original data Alongside with that, we are going to add the action dot task object. Oops. We are going to add the action dot task object. The reason why I'm saying task object is because we have passed the task object out here. So let us do this and let us append it with a semicolon. Now the default case is obviously going to be to return the state as is. So the default state is return the state as is. Now once we do this, we need to export this. So I'm just going to write export default to dos. Now after we have exported this, we need to create our actual index file inside our reducers. So the reason for this is there might be multiple reducers, right? So since there might be multiple reducers, we need to combine all the reducers. So what we are going to do, we are going to create a const root reducer. And this root reducer is equal to combine reducers. Now you can see that Redux has already a function called combine reducers. And we are going to simply put the to-dos which we have created. So it's not getting suggested, no problem. We are going to do import to-dos. As you can see, it got suggested now. So this is our reducer and we are going to import this reducer to-dos. Now we have to export the root reducer. So export default root reducer. So now we have created a reducer. What a reducer does, a reducer has a to-dos which has an initial state, and inside that initial state there's a data. So this data array is basically null right now. If the action received is of type add to do, we append the data with the task object of the action which it has received. Else we simply return the state as it is. So this is all there is to understand in Redux, what a reducer does, what an action does, and out here this image clearly specifies what we have done. So far we have created the action of add to do. We have created this action function as well. We have not defined our store yet. We have defined the reducer and the reducer is able to update the state. Now we need to define this store. So let us go to the src folder. Over here let's create a store. Now, what does the store.js basically have? The store.js is a very simple file and it has a few things which we need to import from here and there. But essentially what we need to do, we need to configure our store. So just remember this so that you can create n number of stores. Configure a reducer to the store. You need to configure the reducer to the store. That's it. There's literally nothing else you need to remember. So let's go down and let's create our object called const store. Now when we write const store, we need to configure the store. So let's configure the store. And as you can see, configure store is a function from Redux.js toolkit. So let's import that. Now we have configured the store. Inside the store, it requires, if you can see out here, there is this thunk middleware store enhancer, etc. But basically there is something called as a configure store options. And this is the most important thing. Our configure store options basically refers to a reducer. So we are going to type the word reducer. As we can see, it's a configure store option property. So let's type reducer, and inside a reducer, we are going to pass the root reducer, which we just now created. So it automatically got imported. And after this, what we are going to do, we are simply going to export this. So let's type out here, export default store. Now that we have created our export default store, so this store will be accessible by this dispatch event handler. So we have still not created this. This is basically going to be integrated with our component. So for now, we can just understand that we have created an action, a reducer, and a store. Now then, We have done all of this, but as I said, we cannot access all of these right now, right? So the reason for that, it's very simple. We have not created any components for now. So our add to do file, for now we have, since we have only created the add to do action and the add to do reducer, we will simply create the add to do functionality for the next few minutes. And then after that, once we understand what the add to do actually does, we'll create the update to do and delete to do functionality. So let's go to our SRC. Inside our SRC, let's create a folder, not a file, a folder, and we'll call it components. Inside this components, we are going to create a React component. So I am not going to be focusing on CSS in this video. So you can add any amount of CSS you want. I'll recommend Tailwind CSS because it helps you out quite a lot and it creates very nice responsive UIs. So anyways, let's go to add to do file. Now there's an extension which is linked in the description. In that we can get many snippets of React. So for now I'm just going to type RAFCE, and as you can see this extension creates a React arrow function component export. So let's type this and it's very simple. We have simply created this very quickly. The next step that we need to do is we need to create a form, and that form should have an on submit handler. The reason for that is when the user submits, then we want the action to get triggered. So let's just create a form, and inside this form let us create an on submit, and let's leave the on submit blank for now. We will fill it up, don't worry. So now that our form is created, we need to create an input, and the input should be of type text. So the default type is called text. Over here we are going to specify a name. It's very important to specify the name because we will be able to access it then easily. So let's specify the name. ID may be required for CSS, but for now I don't need an ID. The next step we are going to create is a submit button. So let's type BUTTON, and as you can see there's a submit button recommendation. So I'm simply going to type that and write add to do. Now we have created our add to do this thing. So as you can see there's an error. The reason for that is obviously there is no, it's not supposed to be empty. So before the return statement, let's go on top and let's create a function. So let me type function. As you can see there's a function block available in VS Code. Let's type that. The name of this function can be handle form submit. Yeah, the name of this function can be handle form submit, and the parameters that it will take is E. So if you know basics of JavaScript, E is basically something called as event, and in our case the forms trigger actions based on the event. So out here if I need to access, for example, user input, I will simply write e.target.userinput.value, and that is required because we need to dispatch an action based on the value of the input provided by the user. So anyways, the first thing we are going to do is e.prevent default. We are going to write e.prevent default because we want to prevent the default action. The default action of the React form is basically to reload the page, and if we reload the page we will lose the user input provided. So we have to definitely write e.prevent default. Out here let me type handle form submit, and once that's done we need to check for one thing: is the value null? If the value is null, we have a problem. So let's type e.target.userinput. So as you can see, the user input here is the same name here. So just check that. And if e.target.userinput.value, so that means if the value exists, matlab it's a sensible value, then we need to proceed with the next step. Else we don't need to go ahead. We can simply wait. So now we need to create something known as a dispatcher. And our dispatcher is actually provided by React. It's something called use dispatch hook. So let's go again above the function. And out here we need to create a const dispatcher. And out here we can just type use dispatch. And as you can see, React Redux provides us with a use dispatch hook. And now that our dispatcher is defined, we can type dispatcher. And after we define our dispatcher, the next step that we need to do is we need to dispatch of an action of add to do, right? The reason for that is we are creating the add to do, right? We are creating, no, we are creating the functionality for add to do. So we have to dispatch the add to do method. And inside the add to do method, we are going to pass two parameters. The We are going to pass the task object. So what is the task object made up of? The task object is made up of two things. One is an ID and one is a value, right? So let's just create that for now. I'm going to leave this null for now. I'll define why I'm leaving it null. So the task is going to be this e dot target dot user input dot value. I'm just simply going to type it here. Okay. So now in order to create our ID, there is something called CUID, which is basically an NPM package. So it helps us create unique IDs, hence the name CUID. So let's NPM install CUID. So as you can see, the package has been installed. And once this happens, we can type import CUID and let's simply type CUID. So this function helps in the creation of such objects. And as you can see, there's still an error. The reason for that is very simple. I forgot to pass this as a JavaScript object. And yeah, now the errors are sorted. So our ID is going to be created by this unique ID thing. So it always generates a unique ID. So we don't need to worry about that. And our e.target.userinput.value, if it is a sensible value, then only it dispatches it. Else we don't want to populate a store with random values. So after this is done, obviously now the form has been submitted, everything has been done. So we can simply set this user input value back to null, so that the user can simply quickly add rather than backspacing and then again doing that. So this is our add to do component. Now we need to see this add to do component on the screen. So let's go to app.js. Over here, let's type add to do. As you can see, it got imported automatically. Let's backspace all the unnecessary spaces. Now let's type npm run start or npm start. Both will do the same thing. So once this starts, I will encourage you to install another thing. It will be linked in the description. It's called Redux Dev Tools. And basically it helps us see the store in real time. The Redux store is not directly accessible through the console. So we need to add this extra plugin. I use Brave browser. You can use Chrome also. You can use any browser you want. But in order to get the Redux toolkit, obviously you will need to download it from the Chrome store. So as you can see, we have got an error. The store is not defined. So in order to diagnose this error, we can simply go to the index.js file. We removed the store value from here. So let's import the store from here. Import store. As you can see, we have got a suggestion. And now let's reload the file. And after we have imported this, we can see that there's a very simple form which has been created here. I have not focused a lot on the So I just want this to look neat and clean. So yeah, that's why I put those breaks. And as you can see, the CSS, this is very bare bones. So we can see that we have created our add to do input form. Okay. And now let me just, for example, I've written all of this previously. So let me just type add to do. And we can see that there's nothing like actually visible because the Redux store is hidden. So let's simply right click, go to this Redux dev tools. I'm going to open in a panel to the bottom. And once this is done, I have already set it, but in order to see it, you need to go to this place called state. And inside the state, you can simply load the raw part. And we can see that we have a to-dos. And inside this to-dos, there's the data. And this data array has an ID, which is created by CUID. And then the task item, which is basically the message of the task, is called add to-do. In order to see this in real time, let's add another SSSS. And let's open the Redux thing again. If I open this a bit bigger, we can see that there is this another new task which has got added of SSSS. Now the thing is, why I use the CUID is, if we have another task called SSSS, we can see that it gets created with a new ID. The ID is new. So we don't need to worry about what the task value is, because we can use the ID for stuff like updating and deleting. So this is completion of the add to do functionality. So now we can see that we are able to add the component successfully. But if you remember this image, the UI was getting re-rendered. So how do we create that in our application? Very simple. Let us create another component and let us call this component task list. So this task list.jsx is a component. This component is able to render all the tasks that are available in the Redux store. So now in order to create a component called task list, we are simply going to understand that there's another hook. Just like use dispatch is a hook, there's another hook called use selector. This helps us access the data which is inside the Redux store. So now let us start by again using the snippet RAFCE, and as you can see our task list has been rendered quickly. Now we just need to understand that we are going to return a constant called task items, and inside this task items we are going to do all of the magic. So let's go here and let's create our const task items. This task items is going to basically use something called as task objects, task objects, and this task objects is going to be mapped like a normal array. This is again JavaScript, so you need to know the basics of JavaScript to understand this. For each task, we are going to return our task item, and this task item accepts, sorry, not task item, let's call it to do item so that we are able to understand everything clearly. And this to do item accepts two things. The first thing is the task, which is equal to task. So this is our first prop. The second prop is the key, and the key is going to be passed as task.id. Again, open the curly braces, task.id. Yes, I feel this looks good enough. So now we have created this task obj. What is this task obj? This is only where we are going to use the use selector hook. So const task obj. So this is equal to use selector. As you can see, use selector is suggested. And inside this use selector, what we are going to do, for the initial state provided, we are going to simply return the state dot to dos dot data. So now you may be wondering, how do I know that to dos is the name of the the object which is existing in the state? Very simple. The reducer's name, inside the reducers we have created this initial state. So the reducer's name is what Redux picks up for the name of the object inside the state. So make sure that if you have changed this name, you have to change it here as well. Or the next step, which is very simple, is you can go to Redux DevTools and you can see out here it's written todos.data. So let's minimize this. Now we need to create a to do item. So let us also write import and since we are going to create it on this in this directory only dot / to do item. So now in our components, let's simply add and create a to do item. Inside this we are going to again use the RAFCE. Now the props are going to be passed in this. So there are two ways to pass the props. The first one is to simply write the value props and then use it as props.data, props.whatever, but I don't like that method. Rather than that, I prefer just writing it like this. And of course the reason this is the props name is because we have passed it as task equal to task, so that's why I just prefer writing this method. It's up to you. Now here is where we are going to define our edit and delete functionality. The reason is, as we saw in the demo, the edit and delete was provided next to the next to the to do item. But just for the sake of simplicity for now, in order to visualize our add to do items, I'm just going to write something like a p tag, paragraph tag, and inside this paragraph tag I'm simply going to write task. Now you may be wondering, what is this task.task? Why is it task.task? Very simple. If we see, we have passed the object with the variable called task. So this is our object. Inside this object, there is a ID and a task. We have already used the ID, if you remember, in the task.id as the key. So our task.task is going to be this text. So for now, let's just simply leave it as it is. Go back to our app.js. Inside this, let us write the task list component and shift alt F control S, and let's reload the page. As we have reloaded it, let's go back to our application, and as you can see, the three tasks that we provided, they are available here: add, to do, SSS and SSS. So if we add something else, let's say I add some SDSS. So as you can see, it gets added. Hi. So one definite task for you is to subscribe to this channel so that you can receive the latest updates. Thank you. So now let's come back here. Now we have created the add to do functionality completely and we are able to view the items. Simply we need to create two buttons that help us edit and delete the items which have been provided here. So let's go back to the to do item. Now in this to do item, there's going to be a bit of a complexity associated with this, since when the person is editing, we do not want him to see anything apart from the edit form. Let's go on top. First of all, for obvious reasons, we need a dispatcher. So let's define our dispatcher. And we need to import the use dispatch. And now our dispatcher is defined. So this dispatcher is going to help us update and delete at the same time. So again, let's follow the flow before we start creating anything. In our to-do item, there is going to be the functionality for update and delete, right? So let's again follow the flow. First thing we need to go is go to our action. Inside our types, we have already defined update to do and delete to do. Now we need to go to our index.js. Over here, we are going to create the functions that look very similar to this. So export, you know what, let me just, type this export const so that I don't need to keep retyping it. Yeah, so now what we are going to, over here we are going to call this del to do, which refers to delete to do, and inside this delete to do we are going to pass one parameter. The simplest parameter that's going to be passed here is the parameter called id, since we need to pass the id. After we pass this id, we are going to create a arrow function. In this arrow function, we are going to return the JavaScript object. This will have a type called delete to do. We have already defined it in our types, and the thing that will be passed, which is our payload, it's called a payload. So our payload that will be passed is the id. Now, in order to update the to do, we'll just create the function called update to do. In order to update the to do, we will have to pass two parameters. The first parameter is the id, which we want to update. So it's going to be a JavaScript object. And the second parameter is going to be the new, what is that called? New task text. Okay, let's call it the new task text. Or let's call it new task because we have already defined it as new task. So let's define it as new task. So inside this new task, what we are going to do is we are going to pass the type of update to do. Yes, we can see that there's a type called update to do. We are going to pass the message as it is. Sorry, not message, the ID as it is. And after we pass the ID as it is, we are going to pass this new task as it is. So this is going to be our update to do. Extremely sorry, we have to use this. And also we have to encompass this in parentheses. So these formatting errors might happen, so it's okay. So we can just follow this flow again. So now that we have created our action, The next thing is to go to our reducer, which is called todos.js. Inside this, we have defined the case of add to do. So let's go to the case of delete to do. And inside our case of delete to do, what we are going to do, we are going to return the state as it is. But now what we are going to do is we are going to go to data, and inside this data, we are simply going to filter out the value of ID, which is like we are basically going to put everything except for that ID inside the data table, i.e. deleting the to do item. So let's type state dot data. So this is our array. So now we can use the dot filter method, which is provided by JavaScript. For every to do, which is available, ensure that todo.id is not equal to the ID which is provided in the action. So it's going to be action.id. So now I think this is delete to do. Pretty simple, pretty understandable. Now the case of update to do. This is going to be slightly complicated to understand. So let's progress slowly. Over here we need to return the state as it is. But now again we are going to use a filter method. Over here what we are going to do, we are simply going to delete the data provided, and we are going to we are going to delete the data which already exists, and we are going to update the state with the new data added but which has the same ID. So I'll repeat it so that you understand. We are basically going to remove the ID temporarily, and then we are going to put a new object which has the updated value, but since it's going to be having the same ID, it will look like as if it is updated in real time. So let's type data, and inside our data I'm going to type state data dot filter for each to do. This is very similar to the delete functionality. Ensure that to do dot id is not equal to action dot id. So after we do this, we are going to append to this data variable, or to the data array if you want to say it, and inside that we are going to append the task with action dot new task, as we have already defined out there. I'm extremely sorry. Ensure that you have put this as a JavaScript object and not as put curly braces instead of parentheses. Now we can see action.new task, and we are going to pass the ID. So now that our okay, as we can see, line 17 has a warning. Let's see what is that. Okay, make sure that it's double equal to, since this is JavaScript. And yeah, so now what's happened, we have created a delete to do and update to do inside our to do's reducer. Do we need to change anything in the root reducer? No. Do we need to change anything in the store? If we see, no. So there's nothing to worry about. Now let's go back to our to do item, and out here, since we have created a dispatch, now the state of dispatch will change based on what we want to do. If we want to edit the value, we are going to edit the value, which is also called as updating. And if we want to delete the value, we are simply going to create a delete thing. So let's create a state. So this is called set state, use state, and all that. You should know that. That is basics of React. And if you don't know that, it's okay. You can simply understand what is happening here. So I have created is edit and set edit. So this is the use state that I'm going to create. And out here, I'm going to create a use state of false. The reason for that, by default, the use state is going to be passed as false by default. The reason for that is when the user is seeing the to-do list, he doesn't want to directly edit it. He first wants to see it. So the default state is going to be false. Now, the next step is that we understand that there is something called as if edit return something, else edit return something else, right? So now if the state is that of not edit, that means if the state is default, if the state is of not edit, so if the person is not editing it, what we need to show to the screen, we need to return, inside this return we are going to pass a div. Okay, I think I should return with curly braces, sorry, without curly braces, with just simple parentheses. And will I get my auto suggestions? Still no. Okay, I do get my auto suggestions, thank God. So as you can see, I have returned an empty div for now. The next step is to type the task.task as it is. So let's just copy this. The next step, now we need to create two buttons. The first button is going to say that he is going to edit it, so it's going to set the edit value to true. The next step is, the next button is the one to delete. So since delete functionality is slightly easier, let's create the delete button first. The button is just going to be a button, yeah. So this button will have something called as an on click handler. This on click handler is going to do something very simple. For the current value which is there, we are simply going to use the dispatcher, and inside this dispatcher we are going to del to do. If you remember, we created this action called del to do. This del to do will take only one parameter, which is called the id. In our case, that's going to be task.id, and let's call this the delete button. So for now, let's just save this and see what exactly happens. If we go to our screen and let's reload the page. Now let me just type add to do. As you can see, we have got this delete button. So for the sake of understanding whether it's working properly or not, let's click on this delete button, and as you can see, the delete value the value has been successfully deleted. If we click again, the value again gets successfully deleted. So this means that we have perfectly understood how the delete button works, and our state is updating in real time, as well as our use selector is also updating the UI in real time. So now the delete action has been dispatched, and you can understand the flow very similar to that of this diagram out here. The last step is to create the update functionality. So for now, let us just create a button to understand what I exactly want. Let's again just type on click handler, or you know what, let's just use the on click handler again. That's very simple to understand. Inside our on click handler, we are going to create a function called, no need to create any function, we simply need to use this set edit. This is actually a function. If you remember use state, this is actually a function, and we are going to set our set edit to true. We are going to update the state of set edit to true. That means we are editing it. And out here, let me just type an edit button and control S. Let's see what happens. Now if I just type add to do and enter, we can see there's a delete button and there's an edit button. So let me just create a few more values so that we can understand what I mean to say. It is only editing it for this add to do if I click on this, but this one has both the buttons available. That is very key to understand. Anyways, so now that we have successfully done this, what is this? This is essentially this code out here which is being run. I feel else will be more sort of understandable. So let me just type it as else, and let me just tab this. Yeah, so now the else button, so this is very similar to our add to do button. So let's just go back there. into our add to do component, and out here we need to create this form, right? So let's just copy this form and let's just paste it here. Okay, so now that we have pasted this here, the things that will change out here are we need to create something known as a handle form update rather than form submit. Let's call this form update. So this is a function which we are going to create right now. Out here we are going to, inside our input, we are going to change a few things. Let's explore something called default value, and this default value is going to be our task, so that when the person is editing, he is able to edit the correct task. Now the name of this, it should not be user input, it should be updated item, because that makes more sense. We are updating this item. And our button should have the value of confirm edit rather than add to do. For now, let's just see what happens. And of course, yeah, we need to create this handle form submit function. So let's just type function, and out here we are getting this function statement. Let's call this handle form submit. Our params is again going to be just e, and out here let's just type e dot prevent default for now. As you can see, it has got successfully loaded. Let's see what happens. So as you can see, our status for these are confirm edit, confirm edit, confirm edit. Okay, so now that we can now edit this basically. So this is very similar to our add to do form, but the only difference is now we are able to edit it, and as soon as we click confirm edit, nothing happens. The only thing that happens is basically e dot prevent default. So just for the visual appeal, let's set edit to back to false, because now our edit is complete. So after our edit is complete, we have to set edit to false. Now let's save it, and now we'll understand that if we click confirm edit, it should be updated, but right now it's not updated. We can update this basically. So now as you can see, our confirm edit form is loaded here. We can edit this, but if we click confirm edit, our set edit gets set to false, but our value doesn't update because we have not used the dispatcher on the update yet. So let's just do that. Okay, so now that we are going to do the handle form submit, again, we have this value called name updated item, and it's very similar to the add to do functionality. So let's just go back there and re-refer it. So out here, if you see, we checked for the e.target.userinput.value. So let's just copy this up, and rather than writing it as e.target.userinput.value, over here, since our name has changed, it is called updated value, right? If I remember carefully, updated item. Now we are writing e.target.updated value. So that means if the value has some meaning to it, what we are going to do, we are going to use a dispatcher. Inside our dispatcher, we are going to type the update to do action, and this update to do action has, as you can see, it has an object which accepts two parameters, id and new task. So the id is going to be the same, task.id, and now that our id is done, the next step for us to do is our update to do should have the new task. The new task is basically going to be this e.target.userinput.value. So let's just type new task and let's just paste this. So now that this is done, so now let's just check it out. And if we now add to do, we have got the add to do functionality. If we delete it, we can able to delete it. Now if we click on edit and SSSS co, I'll change this to RRRR. And let's click on confirm edit. As you can see, we have successfully changed it. And if you go back to the Redux dev tools, we will be able to see that our actions of delete to do and update to do have been passed successfully to the store. And now this is our complete to-do list application. I hope you have successfully understood React and Redux and how they work.